What's up, guys? It's your boy Zowoki, back out with some more of the Chris Watts videos, and today we're looking at part 2 of the letters from Christopher that we are watching, listening, discussion, and so forth at the end. But we're going to be looking into letters from Christopher discussion, chapter 12 through 17, part 2 for Zowoki's channel. So before we go any further, if you guys could do me a solid favor and subscribe to my YouTube channel by hitting that wiper icon down at the bottom right, hit that bell icon next to it, so when I do post videos like this one, you guys will get that little ring notification that I posted that video, and then you guys can watch, comment, like, and share. And again, I thank you guys so very much for the love and support that you guys show on my channel. I'm so blessed to have all you guys. Also, we're going to be watching Unmasked True Crime. She's the one that's going to be talking while we listen, react, commentate, and also discuss at the end. So without further ado, let's get into the video.
Guys, this is part 3 of the discussion on the letters from Christopher book. We're going to go ahead and start at chapter 12 and just jump right in. Okay. And chapter 12 starts at the morning of the murders. It starts out talking about how Nicole Atkinson was becoming really concerned that morning. She had reached out to Shanann and texted her multiple times, and she hadn't gotten a response. Nicole was supposed to come over that day, and they were going to go pick out a car because Nicole had reached a new level with Thrive.
She's going to get a new car? What the fudge?
And they were supposed to meet up after her doctor's appointment. And of course, we know that when Nicole became concerned, and I believe it was Cassie that she was talking to, Shanann's other friend, that she went up to the doctor's office and asked them if Shanann had showed up. And at first, they wouldn't give her any information, but she just said, you know, let me know, no HIPAA information has to come out, but I just want to know if she showed up. And they said no, that she had not. And once she found out that she hadn't showed up for her doctor's appointment, they became very alarmed. At this point, she goes back to the house and she's talking to Cassie.
And in that time, while Chris wasn't there, Nicole had left. At 12:45 to 12:47, there was movement in the house. Sensors were going off. Dieter was in his cage. And yet you people that are defending Chris or Nicole want to sit there and say there was nobody that was involved. Then why were the sensors going off?
And from what I understand, it was, you know, Nicole wasn't sure what to do. And, you know, every time I read this, I just get chills because I feel like we all needed Nicole and a Cassie in our life. They were just so on it. And I hate to think what would have happened if they wouldn't have been so on it and if they wouldn't have been such great friends. And I never understood the pushback that Nicole got because she did exactly what a good friend should do. And she was so observant of everything and so smart about everything, including her son, by the way.
Yep.
That, I mean, I think she and Cassie were two of the biggest heroes in this entire thing.
Agreed.
So at this point, Nicole and her son, Nicholas, are trying to get in by the front door using the code, but that wasn't going to work because that latch that Frank had installed above the front door to keep the girls from running outside. I guess Cece would take off outside, and so Frank had installed that. That was latched. So either Shanann latched that when she walked in at 1:48, or who knows, Chris latched it, you know, afterwards. I'm thinking that Shanann most likely walked in and latched it. So when Nicole looks through the front door, her panic increases because she sees Shanann's shoes sitting by the front door, and they're the same shoes that Shanann wore every day. So when you put this together with the fact that she hadn't shown up for her doctor's appointment and the way she was acting and feeling in Arizona, they're pretty much becoming frantic at this point. So they start calling Chris, as we know, and telling him he needs to get home. And as we know from...
If I do add this as well, Chris said, oh, don't call the cops. I'm coming. But it took him how long to get there? And then it didn't even show, or he didn't even look like he was like, no, he was just like nonchalant coming and, hey, what's going on? And when he went into the garage looking through the Lexus, can't find nothing, but he goes through the house, doesn't call out Shanann, Bella, Celeste, nothing that you can hear him say.
Discovery, Chris sees Nicole trying to enter the house. He gets a notification. And it's interesting because we've only got Nicole's perspective up to this point and then law enforcement's perspective up to this point. We've never really gotten Chris's. We got to see him through those body cam videos, but we've never got to know actually what was going on in his head at the time. So Chris actually says he was pissed. He says that he was taken aback by how fast people noticed that she was missing.
Fast.
It's just another indication of how out of touch he was. He was so focused on his end goal, which was to murder them and move on with his life and start his life with Nicole, that it never occurred to him that that she confided in her friends and that her friends knew she had a doctor's appointment and that
they knew the night before. They knew the weekend before. They he thought he was going to be a smooth criminal, and he ended up being the Jeffrey Dahmer, well, not Jeffrey Dahmer, I was going to say the Wish.com version, but he is literally the Wish.com version of a murderer because he completely botched on everything. He thought he was going to get away with this murder.
that they would pick up and be concerned so fast, and he was pissed. For those of you who haven't watched all of the body cams, I'm going to link some of them below because if you haven't watched them, a great way, I know a lot of us have been, in this for over a year, but I know there's also some of you that have, maybe got into it a little bit.
I've been doing this for a year. And there's some things that I still haven't seen. So I don't know if you guys watching at home, there are some body cam footages that we've watched, we've dissected, but if there's any more body cam footage, would you like me to react to those and watch them? Comment down below, let me know.
Later, and don't know the discovery as well or whatever. And the easiest way, in my opinion, to really get all of the information is start at that first body cam when Nicole calls the police and then just work your way through everything. And I think, again, that's one of the reasons people are so obsessed and became so fixated on this case is I can't remember another case where we see from the 911 call, the frantic and the police showing up, and then we have that, kind of building anxiety about what's wrong with her. Then we see the murder suspect come home, and with the Nate camera footage part, it's fascinating. And you're basically getting a inside look from the 911 call all the way through to sentencing and beyond.
Just think if this went to trial, how much stuff we would have seen
with what happened in the murders. So anyway, Chris at this point tells the author that he thinks that Nicole called him 3 times. And he kept trying to push her off, telling her basically to leave. And in discovery, it makes it...
And then you got Sandy Rusek in the background on the phone. Nikki, I give you every right to go in that home. Like Sandy had given 2 Fs about what Chris wanted. And she wanted Nicole to go in there and start looking and stuff. So I commend Miss Mom Sandy Rusek for giving no Fs given.
It sounded like Chris was, again, acting out of character and was pretty rude to her about get off his property and go. And everything was fine. And she wouldn't give up. She kept calling him and he kept saying that he was on his way. And then I think, honestly, the only reason that he actually got moving like that was when she said, Cassie wants me to call the police. And he said, no, don't you call the police. And she did anyway. So that's when he starts booking it home. And we also know from discovery that he makes a stop at a dumpster. And this is my assumption, but throws away, I'm guessing, the blankets and the shirt that Shanann was wearing when she got home from the airport and whatever else evidence that he had to get rid of. So Nicole Atkinson calls the Frederick PD, and as she's waiting for them to arrive, she gets her son to look through the garage window, and he can see her car. And not only can he see the car, but he can see that the car seats are still inside. So in Nicole's mind, she knew at this point that Shanann was absolutely in the house because she wouldn't go to a play date or anywhere without her car seats. So
or the
Officer
medicine.
Coonrod from the Frederick PD is dispatched for a well check and arrives at 2825 Saratoga Trail around 1:40 p.m. As they're waiting for Chris to arrive, Nicole fills them in on everything. And then Officer Coonrod tries to call Shanann's phone. And then he does call Chris, and Chris picks up. And then he asks Chris if he can get into the house through the garage. And Chris tells him that the garage code doesn't work. When Chris gets there, he jumps out of the truck and he hurries up the driveway and briefly shakes the officer's hand and then pretty much books it into their garage. And then he flings open the door to Shanann's Lexus and reaches in. And a lot of people think that he reached in to grab her wedding ring or put back a garage opener, possibly. I personally think he took her wedding ring and put it in his pocket at that point. He denies this and says that he doesn't know why he did that and that he was just trying to show that he was looking for.
But too, if the wedding ring was in there, in the Lexus, how did it get there? Did he hide it there? Did he put it there like when he was taking her out the front? Did he remove it and then put it in the Lexus? Just kind of wondering what you guys' thoughts are.
For her. I don't know why he would be looking for her, hiding in the car. That doesn't make sense to me. So I think it's more likely, yet again, that he was pulling the wedding ring out that was sitting in there. Instead of just letting them into the house, Chris runs into the house and spends over a minute in the house alone, to what I would assume he's hiding evidence as quickly as he can, what he thinks is important and he didn't get to.
But the thing is too, is he opened up the garage door, or not the garage door, the basement door, because when you look inside the window, like when you the body cam footage of the police officers, you can't see the bath or the door open to the basement. So he had gone in the basement for some reason, possibly to check if somebody was there, possibly left. I don't know, but you can see it in the first body cam footage. Hopefully we see it.
Before he left for work. So you can see on the body cam, it's incredibly awkward that he just runs in the house, and it seems like much longer than a minute, but that's how long he's in there. And then he finally comes down and he, in my opinion, looks annoyed and opens the front door, and they ask if they can come in. And pretty much one thing I thought was, it's not funny, but it is that Nicole just pretty much storms right in there before he even answers, because Sandy's on the phone with her and says, I'm giving permission, get in the house. And she pretty much barrel rushes right past him and enters the house. The author's talking about how the police officer found Shanann's purse on the kitchen counter and that it was open and her wallet was out. It's important to note the author doesn't talk about this in here, but it is in discovery that that purse was originally in the office. And when Nicole Atkinson walked in, she found Shanann's purse kind of behind on the floor in the office. She took the purse out and then set it on the counter. You can see on the body cam that when she first walks in the house on Officer Coonrod's camera, there's nothing on that counter. And then later in the interview, Nicole Atkinson says, she clears that up and says that she found the purse in the office and moved it to the counter. So then they realized that her ID.
Because people were sitting there and blaming Nicole that she was looking for something that she wasn't supposed to, or they're like, oh, she brought out the purse. Like, okay, maybe she brought it out to show the police officers, hey, this is her purse, all her medicine's in here, look for yourselves. She probably was just like, how you tattle like on your brothers and sisters back in the day, and you're like, look, and it's like a broken piece of something that they broke. You're showing evidence. So she was probably showing evidence that, hey, she didn't take her purse. There's all the medications in here. Like, we need to figure out what's going on. That's what I'm guessing. But I still can't believe that people want to sit there and blame Nicole Atkinson. Like, the haters of Chris Watts, or the haters, or the lovers of Chris Watts hate everybody that is not Chris. They'll blame everybody but Chris. That's the messed up part.
ID, her medication, everything is in there. And that's when you can really see the panic set in on Nicole's face.
She's freaking.
When they go upstairs to the master bedroom, the officer immediately realizes that the sheets are stripped off of the bed and lying on the floor. And you can see him kind of nonchalantly go over there and pick them up and look at them for what, we're assuming is blood or any
Biggest red
signs of
flag.
foul play. At this point, they spend quite a bit of time in the loft area, and this is really interesting to watch on the body cam. Chris pretty much has his head buried in his phone to avoid eye contact, and I think as kind of an escape from speaking
I also think he's talking to Nicole. So
to the officer. At this point,
We've seen the phone
Nicole's son
records.
finds Shanann's phone in the couch cushions and brings it over. And that's an interesting moment as well, because Chris picks up the phone and Nicole's reaching for it and their hands kind of briefly touch. And you can see Nicole rip her hand back and kind of recoil from him in disgust, because at this point, I think she's pretty much aware of what happened. Another interesting part to notice is that Chris goes into the bedroom and comes out with this stupid look on his face and pulls this ring out like, look what I found. I mean, it's the most staged thing ever. I'm sure it was in his pocket. And then Nicole's face there too. It makes me so sad. And pretends that, Shanann left it by the bedside. Again, he assumes everyone is so stupid. And I don't understand how he thought he was going to get away with this. But
he
pulls it out like, oh, she must have left him and left it by the bedside. By the way, none of this is in the book. I have to, really quick, this chapter and the chapters following are completely out of order. They even jump back and forth between the 13th and 14th constantly.
Weird.
It is so disorganized right here and so hard to follow that I'm still reading, pulling from the book for you, but I'm entering my own knowledge to kind of clear things up, because if I just went through this like it is, it wouldn't make any sense. So when Chris finds
listening to her, she's also saving me $20.
The phone, it comes out, which is another really interesting moment, that he doesn't know the code to her phone. So Shanann has changed the code and didn't tell him. And I believe it's Sandy that knows the code and says it's the baby's due date, which I doubt he even knew. So he just has this, again, dumb look on his face. And Nicole is the one who tells him the code. And I do believe it's from Sandy. And then that is just another indication that he was so disconnected from her and shut out.
Because they were trying to get into her phone. And when I say they, Chris and somebody else, I can't prove it yet.
And it also tells me that any plans he had to stage any texts and try to buy himself some time, he probably already knew he was locked out of that thing and got frustrated and threw it in the couch, because there was no way he was going to be able to do anything with her phone. As a side note, in Discovery, it says that her phone was at 50% when it was found. I think this is in one of the supplements from October.
So she didn't put on the charger.
Personally, that's a big clue, because she had just come from the airport, and I think that this fits in line with...
And like 90% of people, they want to get home and start charging their phones.
What I think happened when she got home. But if she would have put it on the charger when she went to bed, as I guess was the normal, if he actually did what he said and he killed her at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. or whatever he said two different versions, that phone would have been charged at 100%. But the fact that it was at 50%, it might not mean something to everyone, but I think that it's just more proof that as she came in the door and came upstairs is when he attacked her. It also says in the book that as the cops were looking around, they did notice a load of clothes in the dryer, and the washing machine had some items in it that looked like children's clothes.
Suspicious.
At this point, Nicole's son makes everyone aware that the next door neighbor, Nate, has video that might show what happened that morning.
Just think if Nick didn't say nothing. Man, that man definitely helped, because we probably would have never even seen this, to be honest.
So they go over to Nate's house, and of course you can get this on the body cam, and it is definitely worth the watch. They sit there and watch the camera from that morning, and they see Chris loading up the car. And you basically see Chris have an absolute meltdown on camera while they're watching this. Also, this is not in the book, but if you don't know about the commercial, while you're watching the body cam of him watching that video, a commercial comes on for American Horror Story. And a lot of people caught this, a long time ago, but if you haven't seen it, it
It's
is incredibly
ridiculous.
spooky. This commercial basically has it cuts to, and Chris is standing there. It's already a very tense moment. And
then he sees the screen. She's probably going to say this, but I wanted to just show that I know it too. But he looks at the TV. He goes, "Oh yeah, she's 15 weeks pregnant." And there's a deceased woman. She's buried in the ground. There's oil. There's a baby that's also deceased. It's so creepingly, is creepingly a word? So creepy how it's identical. It's you got to take a look at it. We'll probably see it right now.
Commercial has a fetus in a womb, and he actually turns to the officer after the commercial airs and says, "Oh, and she's pregnant." And it just gives you the chills. But in the commercial, you just have to watch it for yourself. It has, it looks like oil and an explosion, and then it has a skull. It's just incredibly creepy considering what's going on and the timing. So as the afternoon progresses, a detective shows up, and there's just different officers questioning Chris. It goes into here that the police were asking Chris if any money had come out of their bank accounts, and of course, he says he can't get into the accounts, and he's kind of stalling. I don't necessarily believe that. I think that he just said that because he was stalling the point that, it was not going to show that she did take anything out. But he does tell the officers that he doesn't have access because she doesn't trust him with the finances. We also know from Discovery that he's actually texting Nicole back and forth while the police are there asking him about his family. At one point, he actually does answer and says, "Can I call you back?" And it's on the body cam. The cops eventually leave, but they do canvass the area and they go around asking the neighbors questions. They're also calling her friends and getting more information. And they do this throughout the night. They also call Chris late that night and try to get information from him.
Call.
And we'll do another video on that because there is something interesting, in our opinion, that comes about that night. But bottom line, Chris is left.
Oh yeah, she's not involved, but yet she's listening in on the conversation because he was trying to do a three-way call.
Left all alone in that house that night.
And that's not the only time that she tried to do it.
To clean and further try to get rid of evidence. Chapter 13 starts off by talking about this evil force. And he tells an author a story about that night. And as we know from Discovery, he was up most of the night cleaning, but he probably got a few hours of sleep. And this is the story that he tells Sherilyn. He says that an evil force was pursuing him while he was living in his home. And he kept having this recurring dream prior to the murders. He says in the weeks leading up to the murders, this disturbing dream made him realize there was something that was coming after him. He realized it had been chasing him until it caught him.
All these murderers say the same thing. I'm delirious. I'm delusional. I need to be in an insane asylum so I can be more in a not prison-y kind of atmosphere. They do it almost every single time that there was some dark force that took over them and they didn't know what they were doing with their hands and it was somebody else, and it's like, shut up.
In this dream, he would see himself lying on their bed asleep. And then he'd wake up in the dream and all of the lights in his house would be on, upstairs, downstairs, every single light. He would realize that he was all alone, that his family was gone, and it was just him. He says the dream gave him an awful feeling somehow, and that he knew the dream was going to come true. This is so disgusting because, yeah, obviously, I'm sure he did have that dream because that's what he was planning nonstop for the past 4 weeks, to wipe out his family, and he knew he would be alone. I doubt it gave him a awful feeling, considering he talks about before this and after this nonstop in the book how relieved he was to get rid of them. He goes on to tell the author that the night that he killed his family, he turned off all the lights, went to sleep, and then he just woke up, kind of scared and noticed that all the lights were on in his home, even though he knew he turned them off, just like in his dream. The next day, on August 14th, canine units were scheduled to come over and do a search through the house. This isn't in the book, but it's important to note that before the canine officers got there, Chris moved his truck down the street. I believe that this was in an attempt, hoping the dogs
What?
wouldn't hit on his truck. As they're searching through the house, Chris has already signed the consent to search form. They do see that 3-foot doll that we all know from
And
when the
tissue
doll pic
paper.
was sent to Shanann and she posted it on Facebook. We have a separate video on the doll, so in the interest of time,
It's pretty much a premonition.
I'll just kind of skip over this because this is where he says that he sent it to her and it was meant to be funny. But I would suggest
How
watching
is
that
that
video because
funny?
it goes in more detail about that. It just goes on to talk about the canine officers searching the house. And that's another really good video to watch that you can find on YouTube. I'll link that below as well. But basically, you can just see that they go through, they notice how clean the house is. They smell the cleaning chemicals that are really strong. So
And yet her office was the only part that was in disarray. Well, besides the bedroom having the sheets off, but again, the office was like in shambles to an extent.
they know at this point that he tried to cover up a lot of things. As they're conducting the canine search through the house, this is when Chris does his infamous porch interview. And actually, the Rusicks had told him not to do it, but he did it anyway and apparently thought he would pull this off. But I still remember sitting on my couch watching this because I only live a few miles from them and
Oh, really?
thinking, oh my God, this guy did it, which I'm sure a lot of us sat there and thought the same thing. The author writes in the book that supposedly the dogs were to find if there had been a dead body in the house. Then later it was said the dog would be able to sense if there had been a struggle. The report stated there was a struggle or something that happened at the inside back garage door. This would have been the door Christopher brought Shanann through. She talks about how Chris talked to Nicole that day, and in their conversation, she asked where his family could be. And according to her version, she said that something in his voice wasn't right. And she said something like, call me when you find your family. And then this is when she deleted all of the information out of her phone. And this is the author's words, not mine. She writes, when they got off the phone, she cleared all of his text messages and phone calls from hers. She was concerned it would appear she was involved. So before the police found her, she decided to go to them. Although we know that's not true because Anadarko had found out they were having an affair through the emails and they told investigators. Investigators already knew about her. I mean, she may not have known that, but she's probably not dumb enough to not understand that they were going to find her pretty quick. The author goes on to talk about Nicole's first interview with investigators. And her first interview was that day, August 14th, and her dad was present for that at a park in Arvada. The author writes that during Nicole's first interview, that Nicole tried to downplay the relationship and act like he was pretty much just a casual acquaintance that she wasn't very fond of.
Yeah,
And
okay.
as we all know, the relationship was much deeper than that. The author writes that Nicole was always trying to downplay the relationship to the cops. She briefly touches on the fact that there was an unmarked car watching Chris's every move, and you can see that in Discovery as well.
Which
They
it was the
are
police.
watching him, and they think that he's going to go to Nicole's, but he doesn't end up going. She talks about how he talks to Shanann's parents, and of course, we know that they sense that something wasn't right with his story as well. Around 8 p.m. that evening, Chris goes into the Frederick PD for his first kind of light interview with Agent Coder. Chris talks about how it was getting really difficult to answer the questions and he was squirming and the questions were just getting kind of tougher and tougher. And he was trying to think of answers that wouldn't give him away. He agrees to come back the next morning on August 15th and take a polygraph test. As we know, after he leaves that night, he goes home and stays the night with the Thayers. Chapter 14 just talks about the interviews. And once again, she's kind of jumping around. So I'm just going to touch on each one if there's anything from Chris's perspective or anything that she says that's new. During Nicole's August 15th interview, her dad went with her and was pretty active during the interviews. And again, you can find these anywhere on YouTube if you want to listen to them. I don't know how many of you believe that their relationship started at the end of May or beginning of June,
don't.
I personally don't, but it's interesting because right at the beginning of the chapter, there's already conflicting information on that.
It is.
She first writes that Nicole goes in to confirm to agents that their relationship began at the beginning of June. But then on the very next page, it says, she said she deleted all of her text messages between her and Christopher. They had met at work in May or early June. I think there's some stuff to support that that's not true. And if nothing else, just how quickly the relationship escalated. All of this stuff is not going to be this intense and this serious after 6 to 8 weeks. She goes over how Nicole lied to investigators, starting pretty much from the beginning, and says that Chris wasn't wearing a wedding ring. He never mentioned that he was married or had kids, so she wasn't aware of that until he just randomly one day told her that. And obviously, we know that's not true by now. Chris has admitted the truth, and we know from her Google searches that she did look at Shanann's Facebook page
multiple times.
She talks about how Nicole told investigators that they never argue, which we now know is not true, and how they basically had this great relationship. They had a lot in common. Both of them were into fitness.
That's why you had to talk her down off the ledge, because of her bipolarness and she was acting like a complete brat.
Eating healthy. They both loved cars. They had a lot to talk about. They basically both had the same interests.
She literally studied him. She literally was like, I want to know everything about this man. So, yeah, of course she probably... What evidence that showed that she liked cars? She didn't have any classic cars. She had an SUV. Like, it's so, like, stupid how they're like, oh, she loved everything he loved. Of course, she looked at him and she studied him.
She also told investigators that she didn't remember the name of the street from the 2 times that she had been over there, which we know.
But then she Googled it with Ronnie.
No, is not true because the day before the murders, she Googled their address along with Ronnie Watts. She then talks about Ronnie.
It's just a funny thing that the night before the murders is when she Googled the address, and then the morning of the murders, her phone pings in Frederick, Colorado. She has no alibi. She never showed up to work until like 2:30ish. Was there for half an hour, talked to her sex therapist, and then went home. And then people are like, oh, she's not involved.
Watts interview where he was recorded, and he told agents that he's never known Chris to use any drugs, show any signs of mental illness, or have any violent tendencies. She also goes over when Ronnie said that Chris had lost a lot of weight on Thrive, but he felt like Shanann was forcing him to do it. It was his opinion that neither one of them wanted a third baby. He also said that Shanann was extremely bipolar and had paranoid tendencies towards Cindy Watts.
It sounded like Nicole had schizophrenic tendencies.
He also touches on the fight that they had while they were in North Carolina and how they didn't really see their granddaughters much, and then shows the agents a video of his wife playing with the granddaughters. She then goes into Frank Rusick's interview with investigators, and again, there's a lot. I can link it below, but just to touch on the most important things, Frank did observe that Chris was always quiet and never showed any emotion, and that the week he came out to North Carolina, he and Shanann never let on that anything was wrong, but he definitely was acting strange. On the night before the murders, August 12th, Frank says that he called the girls on FaceTime and Bella was eating cold pizza and candy. This is where it gets kind of weird in the book too, because chapter 15 jumps backwards to August 11th for some reason. That's how it starts out. And how she told her friend she was worried he was cheating, and goes back to the lazy dog night and about how much they spent, which she's already touched on. And then she goes into the text messages that Shanann exchanged with her friends up until the murders. And these are all in discovery as well. But there was one thing I want to point out with this, because again, I think it further supports that there was never an emotional conversation. Because if you look through these texts, it looks like on August 8th, they had a lot of conversations. And you know, a lot of the stuff they talked about is what he said they talked about the night of the emotional conversation. The move to Brighton is in here when he tells her that we're not compatible anymore.
He makes it seem like it was emotional on his part. He probably didn't show emotions. He probably was like, you know what? I don't feel like we're compatible. I don't love you anymore. There is another woman. And she was probably bawling.
All of those things that he says they talked about that night are actually things they talked about on August 8th. Chapter 16 goes into Chris's first official interview with CBI. And of course, this is the morning of August 15th. Right after he picked up Ronnie from the airport, they went straight to meet with Tammy Lee and Agent Coder. And I will give you Chris's perspectives on this because we haven't seen these before. He says that he felt a lot of anger, and that was something that he had never felt before, that was the only emotion he felt. He said he did not feel any remorse. Originally, when he was talking to the CBI and Frederick police, he said in his first confession that he killed Shanann in a blind rage. Chris now says there was no rage. He was angry with Shanann over her not allowing him to see his family. When talking to the authorities, and even when talking about his children, and guys, these are his words, he says he felt nothing for them. At this point, strangely, the author jumps backwards to August 14th again and goes into his interview with Agent Coder. I don't understand how this book is organized at all. It is the strangest thing. And then she ends chapter 16 saying that Chris came back the next morning after he picked up his dad from the airport. He took the polygraph test and failed it. And then very oddly, chapter 17 takes us back to August 14th yet again at 5:45 a.m. when the police called Chris to see if he's heard anything from Shanann and the girls, and he told them no. And then it goes back again to when he gets to the police station for that first interview with Agent Coder at 8 p.m. It then jumps back to August 15th and talks about how the cops arrived at 6 a.m. to search the home, and they found the sheets in the kitchen garbage can. And then the author writes, why would Christopher, if he had been planning this, be so careless as to leave a sheet in the kitchen trash? Either he wanted to be caught, or he had something major going on in his thought process. They noticed that there was just one fitted sheet and one pillowcase. The pillowcase had some sort of residue on it that looked like glitter, and we find out later that that is her makeup. And who knows? I mean, Chris is the same guy who left parts of the rake and the sheet at the scene for the drone to find. So I think that the lack of time, things just didn't go his way that he thought they were going to go in his mind. And that flight delay really threw a curveball. So I think that was part of his sloppiness. Then we're back at 11 a.m. on August 15th when Chris arrives at the Frederick PD to do the polygraph, which he's already agreed to do. He read his Miranda rights, and
he wanted to sit there and fight it and said, oh, I wasn't ever read my Miranda rights. Yes, you were. Yes, you were.
Told that he didn't have to do this and he didn't have to talk to the agent.
I'm surprised he didn't lawyer up.
And she jumps to 4 p.m. when the polygraph test was over. If you guys haven't seen this 6-part polygraph series, I watched the one on Denver 7's YouTube, but I'm sure it's a lot of other places. That is another must watch. Tammy Lee is badass. She is so amazing in those.
I wish she went after Nicole.
She goes into how before Chris confesses that the Firestone PD has launched a drone over Survey 319 because of his GPS, and then they see the fitted bedsheet that matches the other two they found in the trash can and the 2 plastic bags in the field near Survey 319. They also saw the freshly overturned dirt, and they figured that it was likely a grave. The only other thing she really does in this chapter is she goes over the questions that Chris was asked on the polygraph, which were, did you physically cause Shanann's disappearance? His answer was no. Are you lying about the last time you saw Shanann? His answer was no. And so do you know where Shanann is now? And his answer was no. Then she basically sets it up for the next chapter, which goes into his first confession.
Which was
so that's
joke.
It for this part. I'll do one last part tomorrow that'll touch on the rest of it. We've gone through the majority of it, but there still is the first confession, the recovering of the bodies, the autopsy.
Which we're going to do for the next video, which is either going to be tomorrow or Saturday when it comes to the final chapters of Letters from Christopher. My part 3, her part 4 and 5. Let me know your thoughts, how disgusted you are. A lot of us are disgusted. But there are people out there that still defend this man. I don't know how. I don't know why. But again, your comments I would surely appreciate down below. Don't forget to go over to Unmasked True Crime. Go give her some love. Subscribe here. Like the video. Share with your friends. We will see you guys in the next one. Keep it real. Keep it safe. And as always, keep nerding on. And we will see you guys next time.